Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, the #1 source for news, analysis, and discussion on the Detroit Red Wings, the NHL, and all things hockey. Here are your hosts, Ryan Hanna, Brad Crisco, and Evan Lopsinger.
Happy Halloween. You guys want to start prospect profiles, or is that a little bit too scary for today even?
That's a little too scary for me.
It's October 31st, man. And that joke has already been used so many times. I don't know that I can handle much more of it.
I can't do it. I refuse.
So last episode, we recorded past your bedtime, Evan. And now this episode, we are recording at Evan's witching hour, which is some unholy hour in the morning. You guys were here before the sun came up, which is just generally a bad thing for me. But again, here we are after a thrilling Detroit Red Wings game, which warrants conversation.
The Red Wings should have pushed a lot harder to trade for Kyle Connor. In retrospect, I didn't push hard enough.
This is your fault. This is what you're saying is the Red Wings' failures this season so far are your fault, Evan Lobsinger. Look at the camera. Say, I'm sorry.
Hey. I'll take that burden on, though.
At least we have Grand Rapids Griffins tonight for some positivity this episode. Folks, welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here bright and early to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, Winged Wheel Podcast night with the Grand Rapids Griffins, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we have a couple major topics to talk about with the Red Wings. First and foremost, Olli Maatta was traded at pretty early in the evening for Steve Yzerman's standards, but Olli Maatta was traded to Utah. So we'll talk about what that means for Detroit, what the return was, how this affects Johansson, Kasper, Detroit's defense core, and more. And then last night's Winnipeg game, what looked bad to start and then looked kind of decent after that, and then was bad again by the third period. So we are going to take a look at the fallout from that game and then a conversation after about, is this sustainable for the Detroit Red Wings long term? Because again, it's still early in the season, but it doesn't feel the same as, the early losses. So we'll get into that conversation. We are going to actually jump into an interview as well with Craig Custance to talk about the foundations of what a winning team is in the NHL in his new book, The Franchise. And then we have some NHL news, some more Red Wings prospects updates, and more before we jump into overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know that Saturday, January 18th, we are very, very, very excited to return to Grand Rapids for Winged Wheel Podcast Night with the Grand Rapids Griffins. It's going to feature a live pregame podcast recording in the banquet rooms at Van Andel Arena before the Griffins game against the Cleveland Monsters. This was something that was in the works for a long time, and we were actually super, super excited for a reason beyond just going back for a great event. Evan, this is your dream. This is the Dino Jersey night. This is the Jurassic Jersey giveaway with the Griffins.
I refuse to believe that this is a coincidence.
We did it. What do you mean a coincidence? You held us at gunpoint and said, if we don't do it, you're not going back.
That's your opinion.
The Flying Toasters jersey giveaway last year to the Dino Jersey giveaway this year is, we could not have asked for more. And actually, even better, who better to announce this than Sebastian Cossa, the ringleader of the Black Market Winged Wheel Podcast, Grand Rapids Griffins co-branded hat kind of underworld, is the one who put this out and did that video on the Griffins social media. So that's something we're very excited for. And if you saw what Sebastian Cossa was wearing that video, last year we had the caps, black caps, one of them that you see on the podcast table in case you're watching on YouTube.
On my head?
Oh, yeah, you do have it on your head. I can't see that high up. And this year we have the Griffins logo and the Winged Wheel Podcast logo on a gray beanie, which we're extremely excited about. So go to griffinshockey.com/WWP to get your tickets. They are going to go fast. The pregame live recording, the game, the hat, and lots more. Again, griffinshockey.com/WWP, Saturday, January 18th.
We actually only do the events because Sebastian Cossa holds us at gunpoint for more hats.
That's right. Maybe when he gets that NHL salary, that NHL contract, things will ease on us a little bit. But until then,
he'll pass it on to Lombardi or someone else.
Yeah.
He'll pass the torch.
It'll be Augustine or Gylander.
Yeah.
It's always the goalies, man.
Yeah, you got to be careful with those guys.
It's the crazy eyes.
Yep.
We're not going to start with the game. We're going to start with Olli Maatta. It happened at an hour where I had to text Brad. I didn't even bother texting Evan. Like, this dropped at, I think, 11 something p.m. Eastern. I didn't even bother messaging Evan. Someone said, "Are you guys doing an emergency podcast?" I said, "If you can get Evan to the studio alive," that is my disclaimer there, alive, I'll do an emergency episode. Godspeed to you.
You could have texted me at 11. You could have texted me at 10:45. I'm not seeing that thing till 7 a.m. the next day.
I'm glad I know where you live, because in the event that some, groundbreaking Detroit trades for Kyle Connor at 11:30 at night, I will go to your house and throw rocks at your window. But, I was like, well, he'll wake up in the morning and see that Olli Maatta was traded.
Yes, I did.
I texted Brad and told him about the trade, and we were both just kind of like, huh, cool. Yeah, it's a standard, kind of makes sense, not a big needle moving trade. It was Olli Maatta to the very defense needy Utah HC in exchange for a third round pick in 2025 that originally belonged to the New York Rangers. Initial thoughts and reactions.
Well, my initial reaction was I saw your text as I was nodding off about to fall asleep, and all right, I can send a couple thoughts out about this. And then I was asleep 3 minutes after sending them. So I didn't go back and proofread them, so they might not have even been coherent. Most of them aren't anyway. This was, if the Red Wings were going to make a move, this was probably the least surprising of it. There are defensemen that Red Wings fans would have much preferred to move to get off the roster, but contracts dictated that wasn't going to happen. $3 million's probably a bit rich for Maatta, but it's manageable, especially for a team that was in dire need like Utah for a defenseman, a capable NHL defenseman. Carrying 8 defensemen all season did not feel ideal. The games Maatta was in, he wasn't bad or anything, but he's not good enough to make up for the warts all around him. And it'll give Johansson a few more reps, and honestly, a third is more than I thought they would get back, and not having to retain any salary is a pretty big win.
Yeah, Maatta having 1 year left at $3 million. Everyone did go back to Walman right away, and that's understandable because Walman's doing fantastically in San Jose. It's San Jose, the opportunity there will be different, but not like Detroit is performing a ton better on the ice this year.
It's probably worth mentioning, going into last night's game, Walman would have been tied for the points lead on the Red Wings, but
still, you see that and you're like, well, you shipped out that contract. Circumstances are different, and I think for the sake of it, there's a larger conversation to be had, which we're going to be doing over the next days, weeks, months, about the way the Red Wings decor is made up. But this in a vacuum, it was fine. We talked preseason and at the start of the season of the Red Wings have a logjam at defense and someone has to go. Maatta's $3 million, like you said, Brad, is not the most efficient use of money. I think Maatta was outstanding this year. If you go back to what I said last episode, barring Seider, Edvinsson, and whatever defenseman you want to pick from night to night to be a top 3, everyone else expendable. I'm sorry. They each have their games. They each have their nights where they're decent or their attributes that make them worthwhile somehow. But by and large, over the course of a hockey game and the makeup of an NHL defense, they're expendable. This isn't a good decor. And unfortunately, that did include Olli Maatta. And I liked Olli Maatta. I thought he'd have a random game where he would step up in offense. He'd be in the offensive zone. You see him below the opponent's hash marks. You're like, what's he doing down there? And he'll get a goal or generate a scoring chance. Or you'll see that he'll have games or multiple periods in a row where you're like, oh, I didn't really notice him, but he's just been super steady, or he'll be paired with someone and they'll just be kind of rock solid. And then it'll inevitably kind of fade away like all the other defensemen on Detroit who are invisible at best sometimes defensively. It is what it is. It's not a needle mover. Is it a good return for the asset? I think yes. I think Steve Yzerman leveraged a defense needy Utah with Marino and Durzi out long term and got a better return than what Maatta was worth. It's still just a third round pick, so it's nothing to be setting off fireworks about. And Detroit didn't lose anything that changes the overall trajectory of their team. They are just as bad defensively as they were before. None of this is something that kind of moves that conversation or moves that needle in a significant way in my mind. As much as that sounds like dramatic. It's just, that's all it was to me.
Yeah, it was just a tidy piece of business. It gives you a little bit more cap flexibility. It lets you get Albert Johansson in the lineup a little bit more. And let's be frank, there was nobody other than Olli Maatta that teams would want, other than the obvious.
Yeah.
So that's the guy who has to be moved. If you're looking for more flexibility and 8 defensemen isn't what you want, then Olli Maatta is the guy you have to try and ship out. And I liked Olli Maatta's tenure in Detroit. Like all things you mentioned, he was a steady force back there. He would occasionally have an offensive epiphany, but he was the logical target for both Utah and Detroit.
The resounding response I saw when this was posted was, why not Petry or why not whoever else? Petry has a no-move clause. You look at the no-trade clauses of other players. For the reasons Brad and Evan stated, between the clauses and who is viable as a defenseman, you just weren't going to find buyers, or you were going to have to attach something to those players to ship them out, even in the event that you could trade them beyond what their clauses kind of protected them from. So, yeah, this was the path. It clears a roster spot long term. If you're a believer in Albert Johansson having more of an opportunity, this is one less player standing in front of Albert Johansson, especially if you want to look at left side, right side, whatever. That whole thing is being mixed up for Detroit as they continue to try to find anything that works on the right side. But one less person in front of Albert Johansson, as players get healthy and whatever the roster makeup is, this allows you to, depending on the circumstances, keep a Marco Kasper up or call up someone else. It's just the kind of flexibility that Detroit needed. And I'm sure Detroit, as we've seen from their want to accumulate cap day after day after day, having that cap space freed up for them is also worthwhile too, in case they want to do something else. And by God, if the Red Wings want to do anything this year, they're going to have to do some stuff. So the flexibility is good. So yeah, to summarize again, decent move. Olli Maatta will be missed. In the end, he'll be a footnote, which isn't a slight on him. That's just the reality of most of the players on this version of the Red Wings, especially on defense. Tidy bit of business, but not anything to be, writing home about in my mind.
The most important question is this. Does he get a tribute video?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
How long will the standing ovation be?
Tens of seconds.
I think 20 minutes is probably fine.
What number was he? 2? 2 hours standing ovation.
Yeah. Look, Evan, I'm going to, every time a player gets traded, I'm going to find a way to use what little influence I have in this space to make these tribute videos as long as humanly possible, just to see how big of a reaction we can evoke from you. That is Olli Maatta traded. Anything else, like when we talk about what does this open up for Detroit, does this signal anything to you in terms of longer term, what Yzerman might be looking at doing?
This is great for Marco Kasper.
Yeah.
Because now there's not a roster crunch. There is a spot available. They are only carrying 2 goalies. They're only carrying 7 defensemen. That means they can carry 13 or 14 forwards if they so choose. No reason to send Marco back to Grand Rapids unless things go so poorly in Detroit this year that they just deem it's better he gets the hell away from it.
We'll see what comes next. I have a feeling there will be, I think the Red Wings are hoping there will be more. All right, let's do it. I avoided it long enough. The Detroit Red Wings, after days off, took on the Winnipeg Jets, who are nearly undefeated coming in. They had previously lost to the Toronto Maple Leafs, but still the flying high Winnipeg Jets came into Detroit Wednesday night, 7:30 puck drop, and before you could even take your seat, the Jets were up 2-0. They finished the first period up 3-0, and this seemed to be one of those games for Detroit.
Boo Birds were coming early.
Oh, deserved too. I'm sorry, there's just no facet of that. The second period this is the formula for Detroit. You start off terrible. At some point, either end of the first or some point in the second, you have some hope. And Detroit's power play gave it to them in the second, and you came away from the second period going, you have all the momentum. It's a 1-goal game. You could turn this around against an 8-1 team or whatever the Jets are. And then 10 seconds into the third, we'll get into exactly how all of it was destroyed, and it just power slams you onto your, it's just a brutal. Bad. Oh, maybe some hope. No, even worse than bad to end it.
It's the hope that kills you.
It truly is, Evan. It truly is. Anyways, we're almost on year 10 of this podcast. 6-2 Jets is the final, and things feel, and I don't say this lightly, despondent in Detroit.
There are very, very, very few redeeming qualities about this team right now. Like, I'll say it straight up. They are far closer to a lottery team than they are a playoff team as it stands right now. I know the record's 4-5-1, but again, we're sitting here 10 games into the season, and I'm going to keep repeating this until it's no longer true. We're 10 games into the season. They've been outplayed in 10 games.
8.5, Brad. Screw you.
If that's the best you can come up with.
It is the best I can come up with.
The biggest warning sign for me from the game last night has to do with score effect. I know that we've used that term loosely a lot, and basically all that means is typically in a game, if a team is down multiple or big early, the stat line at the end of the game is going to look very confusing because generally that team that gets down big will outshoot the other team by a significant margin because they're trying to play catch up. They got to throw everything on the net. They have urgency. They need to, okay, we're down by 2, 3, 4 goals, whatever it is. We have to throw everything at their net and start getting some goals quickly or this game's going to be over fast. It's the equivalent in the NFL of you look at a team, they lost 40-20, but their quarterback threw for 375 yards and like 3 TDs. Yeah, because they were down big early. They had to play fast to catch up, so they didn't have time to run the ball and kill the clock. They had to start a heavy passing game. So I had a tweet queued up. Of course, this is going to be the first game all year the Red Wings outshoot their opponents because they're already down 3-0 and they're still going to probably lose big. They didn't even outshoot them. They were down 3-0, and until they got those power plays in the second period, looked like they didn't care. It was as tough of a watch as we've seen this season. You're down 3-0. Every hockey coach on the planet is going to tell you the formula when you're down 3-0 is you throw everything, the puck, the kitchen sink, Evan, at the opponent's net.
You would have taken it rather than watch that game, Evan.
I would have.
Yeah.
They still got outshot significantly despite the hole they were in, which to me, in this day and age of the NHL and where the Red Wings are sitting is almost unfathomable.
You turned the scoreboard off last night. Do you think Winnipeg is losing the game at that moment? Because their sense of urgency was what a team should have when they're losing. They were up multiple goals, and they were just shoving it right back in Detroit's face. And they knew when they had a team on the ropes, they put them to bed. There was no doubt that they were winning that game.
That was a well-organized, well-coached team that recognized in the second period, oh, this is slipping away from us, where even though we're outplaying Detroit, Dylan Larkin had a great goal and a great set play on the power play. It was Seider to Raymond to Larkin straight in, and then Alex DeBrincat on the power play redirected a Lucas Raymond shot, came from Seider as well. Those 2 goals, they saw that and went, oh, this game is turning around fast, but we are outplaying this team. We are going to go back to our game. And that's what they did. They didn't shelter. They didn't, turtle and cave. They didn't give the offensive zone up to Detroit. And yeah, you're right, Evan. They were all over them. Mickey was talking about it on the broadcast. Like, this is a good team. Like, I don't care what people say. Like, look how they're playing. They are on top of Detroit.
Yeah. And the one silver lining, as you kind of mentioned there, was the power play was clicking at least for a hot minute there. And it was good because the hockey gods gave the Red Wings a gift because, listen, we're all Red Wings fans here. That first power play goal the Red Wings scored, that wasn't a penalty. That absolutely was not an interference penalty.
No, they were heated. Winnipeg was heated after that goal went in because that was a bad. Even Mick said, I would be heated too. Like, that was tough.
Our Neil was absolutely losing it on the ref, and he was right to. But hey, the hockey gods gave you a gift, and the Red Wings capitalized on it for seemingly the first time this season. great. They carried the momentum, and just how easily they let the momentum slip. Again, to the theme of the game, to the theme of the season.
Well, between periods, it's honestly felt like a different team came out of the locker room. You end the second period with all of the momentum. You've got Winnipeg, one of the maybe the best team in the NHL right now, on their heels. Who came out of that locker room?
Here's the thing, like, Brad, you tweeted this. Without great goaltending, this is closer to a lottery team than not. Alex Lyon wasn't good last night. He wasn't. I think there were moments where it's like, yeah, he didn't really have a lot of help. There was maybe something fluky, but he also wasn't good. Like, he let in more than a couple stinkers. And yeah, that sucks. But at the same time, you're watching the team in front of him. It's not like he failed the team's, best advances forward to try to win that game. He was just another facet of the Red Wings that just wasn't working last night. And so those games are going to happen. You're going to have those. Lyon has been largely fantastic this season. Talbot has had multiple really good games, and that's why the Red Wings have had this near 500 record up until this point. But the team in front of them, it's not like they've been let down by goaltending. So without the goaltending to bail them out, the defense is always bad. Plain and simple, the defense is always bad. And I don't say that lightly. That is a bad thing in the NHL. When your defense is guaranteed to be bad 99 times out of 100, that's terrible. This is the result you're going to have. Frankly, they've outperformed in terms of the standings, what they've actually put on the ice. And so, it's not sustainable. The whole thing, the whole start to the season, even though they have the points on the board, it kind of feels like it was encapsulated in the first 10 seconds of the third period, where Petry tried to collect the puck, instead fired it right out in front. The Winnipeg forward tapped it with the loosest backhand in the world toward the net.
Literally one-handed.
Yep. Alex Lyon let it go past him because he just kind of froze up because everything happened so fast, and he was like, couldn't really read where the puck was going. Just one of those moments where you had a brain fart. And then Ben Chiarot wasn't expecting that to make it past Alex Lyon, understandably, but also what a comedy of errors, where as Ben Chiarot is coming into the crease to try to salvage this broken defensive zone collection of the puck, right off his skates and in, and then it zooms in on Ben Chiarot's face, and he goes, "For sake." And I was like, yeah, Ben.
We all said the same thing.
You and every Red Wings fan. Yeah. What else are you supposed to do there? I
can think of, as a former defenseman myself, I can think of 1,000 other things you should do instead.
Other than saying that. Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean the play.
Okay.
Yeah. What could they have done differently on the play? Literally anything.
Everything on the play, yeah.
If Jeff Petry had collected the puck and shot it at Alex Lyon, it might have been a better option than...
And Jeff Petry had just collected the puck.
And what can we as fans do? I tweeted it, but it's worth repeating. Laugh through the pain.
That's all you can do.
That goal was so ridiculous. You just kind of had to have one of those chuckles. And sorry, Benny, but the reaction made it funnier.
That is objectively hilarious, though.
Yeah.
Separating yourself from the pain, it is just hilarious.
The only thing that makes that not funny and actually infuriating is that took away all of Detroit's momentum.
The game was over at that point.
It was only 4-2, and they had previously scored 2 goals, but you're like, there's no way. And there was no way, because they didn't come back from it.
This is year 9 of the podcast, and this is not going to be the year again where I say, oh, the goaltending X, Y, and Z. There's so many bigger problems than Cam Talbot and Alex Lyon. When the Red Wings in front of them let guys walk down Main Street, or the quality of chances are probably the highest in the league, they're furthest from the blame in my book.
And Evan's right. I would argue the only problem this team hasn't had this year before last night truly was goaltending. Like, Alex Lyon's third period was maybe the worst period we've seen from a goaltender this year, probably pretty comfortably. Talbot's been fine, and, up till this point, Lyon's been doing yeoman's work. The offense, in terms of expected goals, ranks 32nd in the NHL. They're downright anemic. They're pitiful. It's awful. It's not sustainable. Well, the problem is it might be sustainable. They might just be that bad. And the defense is...
James Higgins, man.
Michael Misa?
Nope. Shut up.
Porter Martone?
I'm not doing
That's a
this
sweet
right now.
name, too. Porter Martone's a sweet name.
100%.
There's so many Post Malone jokes in there or things you could do.
That's for you.
I've got one
workshop.
queued up for the first time.
We're not
Wings
doing
one
it.
off the post or the crossbar in a game for the Red Wings.
I can't do this right now.
Oh, I'm delirious. Help.
Anyways, yeah, back to the point. Everything but goaltending on this team, I think, is a severe problem. The offense can't generate anything with regularity, and they can't sustain it. The defense, not only are they bad and untalented, they're disorganized.
This is brutal, man.
We've been saying it gently all year, but we've been saying it.
Yeah.
It's one thing to have this collection of defensemen. There, I put it gently. Happy? It's the way in which they're screwing up that is so infuriating. I don't expect Jeff Petry or Ben Chiarot or Justin Hall to toe drag a guy in the corner and make a clean breakout pass to Patrick Kane cutting across the red line for a 2-on-1. Like, it's not in their skill set, and I understand that. Not everybody can be that guy.
If
If
Jeff Petry toe drags anyone this year, I will put $100 to the Jamie Daniels Foundation.
Well, if Jeff Petry actually does show some offensive flair from time to time, that's what he brings.
I know what I said.
Yeah.
So it's the blown coverages, the careless giveaways, the, in several instances, absolute lack of awareness with the puck on their stick. It's a very, very disorganized group, which is a problem when you're playing a defense-heavy system that not discourages offense, that's the wrong word, but puts offense on the back burner as the secondary priority. You cannot be this bad defensively if that is the focus. It's just unacceptable, and that is on the coaching staff. And I'm not going to sit here and join this guy needs to be fired, this guy needs to be demoted. It's too early in the season for that. But again, we talked all summer about the warning lights with the roster. Okay, well, now the warning lights are on for the coaching staff.
So this is where we're actually going to transition into that conversation. And I'm the one to raise this point because I was also the one preseason in our Red Wings season preview where I went out of my way to say I don't really understand why, national media and folks outside of the Red Wings are saying Derek Lalonde's on the hot seat because this is not a roster where you can do a lot with it. He is kind of just, if you looked last season, the reason Detroit was anywhere close to the playoffs was because they were greater than the sum of their parts. Because on paper, that team did not make sense to be that good. Yeah, they were shooting really well and that wasn't sustainable. And we knew that to a degree, but still they were playing greater than the sum of their parts, even after the goaltending stopped carrying them. And so I said, I don't really understand this with Derek Lalonde. Things would have to go tragically bad for that conversation to flip. So I'm going to put it out there myself to say, I do think things are bad enough right now where that conversation is understandable and warranted. And I don't say that at the same time as pretending the other part of it that I've been holding this entire time has gone away, which is Steve Yzerman has not given Derek Lalonde a good roster to work with. So both things are true in my mind. I will still, from the rooftops, will shout, like, if you have a problem with the Red Wings coaching staff and how they're performing, which is what we're about to talk about right now, fine, fair, let's talk about it. You can't have that conversation without talking about Steve Yzerman has not given Derek Lalonde a roster to work with to actually make this team reliably decent. That said, I still think, given the shortcomings of this roster, what we've seen so far is not sustainable. And I personally don't think this is going to last if it keeps going in this trajectory. And it almost seems insane because you have Erik Gustafsson, who's been a failed signing so far, and pretty much nothing else has worked in terms of the roster moves the Red Wings have made. But still, like, for all the reasons we've talked about to start this episode, nothing is firing for Detroit, and it looks like it's not trending in the right direction. After last game, not the Winnipeg game, the game prior, and I was almost annoyed and catch the post-game comments from Kane and Kopp before we had recorded last episode. I'm sensing frustration from the players too. Like Patrick Kane has talked multiple times very diplomatically, but you do a little bit of reading between the lines about, we need to hold on to the puck more. We need to play with the puck a little bit more in their zone. We need to stay on top of them, because when you have a lead and then you just defend, it's not sustainable. It wears on you. The game always comes back against you. It's just not a way to play when you're constantly trying to defend by default. That's not a winning strategy. And he has said that kind of louder and louder through various interviews and post games. And even Andrew Kopp, none of these guys are out here saying, oh, absolutely, this is the coaching staff's fault, or this is the system's fault, or we should be doing this differently. It's all hockey players speak. But if you're well versed in how hockey players speak, you look at Kane's comments from last post game and Kopp's comments where, he was asked, is his offensive production a result of an expanded role? He's like, I would argue is a decreased role up until now, and talked about playing a ton of defense, too defense heavy, that kind of thing. I'm sensing frustration.
Yeah, and it's deserved. Because again, for me, it's not the who, it's the how. I was pretty pessimistic about this team before the season. I know, because I got ripped for it after I predicted the Red Wings were going to finish 7th in the Atlantic, and I think I had them in the mid-80s for points. And so I look at the results, and they're sitting here 4-5-1. This would be about in line with what I expected. So they are the who, but it's the how that we got here. I didn't know Alex Lyon was going to be this good this year. I didn't predict that. So they got an unexpected pleasant bump from the crease. And they're still somehow sitting about or worse than where I thought they'd be. And I was the pessimistic one. Again, I talked about how disorganized they are defensively. If you're going to be a defensive heavy system, you cannot miss the coverages the Red Wings miss. You cannot make the turnovers the Red Wings make. The carelessness of it all. And then the lack of motivation. How many times have we just sat here and oh yeah, the Red Wings sleepwalked through the first period of that game? Or hell, the Red Wings sleepwalked through that entire game. It's happened way too often. And that's obviously going to be a bad look on the coaching staff. And here's the other problem I was thinking about last night. NHL GMs, even Steve Yzerman, they all are predictable in a few ways. When a team is underperforming, you generally see about 4 different things the team will do to shake the roster up, to kind of send that warning shot through the dressing room. 1, key player gets demoted. Okay, this guy's not cutting it. We're going to have to send someone down. Ville Husso's gone. Okay, we're going to bring up a top prospect, insert him into the lineup. Look, guys, the new wave's coming. You want to keep your job? The young guys are coming. Kasper's up. All right, we got to trade somebody. We got to take someone who's beloved in this locker room, and they are going to another team. Maatta's gone. What's the 4th thing that generally happens once those things have been tried? Coaching change. So Yzerman's already, whether purposefully or just by happenstance, exhausted 3 of the 4 things you can do to shake up a locker room and send a message to them. And can't keep repeating the same things if they haven't worked. And here's the other downside to this too, because again, you can continue screwing around with the roster and you can bring up more than just Kasper. What prospect in Grand Rapids are you bringing up right now? None.
Lombardi's the best performing, but you're not bringing his frame to the NHL right now. Danielson needs his season in Grand Rapids. He's still getting ramped up there. No cause for concern. But
yeah, he hasn't kicked the door down. He's not sitting there going, I need to be in Detroit now. He's been fine, but he hasn't been great. Mazur's hurt. The defensive prospects down there are nothing special. You're stuck right now. The Red Wings are stuck. So even if you're saying, okay, this season's a write-off, it's time for the youth movement, you can't. You're stuck. So Lalonde, fairly or unfairly, it's on him now.
Yeah, I think that's the exact right way to put it, Brad. Fairly or unfairly, his name is up next. And I think there's, to put it like Evan would, there's arguments for both. And I've talked to people around the league who have varying opinions, and someone said, I just don't see it despite what people are saying, because it doesn't change, like you said, Brad, it doesn't change the roster, and this still isn't a playoff team, and Steve Yzerman will know that. And then you're just paying 2 coaches, right? Do they want to be doing that? I don't know. But if you have ambitions of putting butts in seats, I got to tell you, like, I'm going to be very transparent with all of you right now. We had a better time generating interest for this team when they were a lottery team. Like, we did our season preview and we said, this is going to be a bad team, bottom 5 in the NHL, lottery team all year. And it was easier to generate interest in terms of, listens on this podcast, for example. And there's other, like, the fan base is tuning out, and the Red Wings are now competing with the Lions, who are succeeding, and they just had the Tigers, who just generated a ton of buzz. Like, it's not like all of Detroit is failing now. Like, you are going to lose your clientele, you're going to lose butts and seats, and I think that would be Yzerman's motivation to turn this around. Also, it's just bad hockey. Even if you're not a playoff team, I still think Detroit is better on paper than what they're showing now, even if not like a bona fide playoff team. There's arguments both ways, and I think there's failures from the players to the coaching staff to management, and fairly or unfairly, the current heat is on the coaching staff. That's the node where it sits.
I think for me, it really boils down to motivation and execution. And last night's game right now in how the season's gone through 10 games was a pinnacle of that. The team came out with no urgency, no motivation. Yes, you're playing a top team in the league. You can only control how hard you work. And the Red Wings had none of that, and they don't execute. And, I think a lot of that falls on the coach. Like, you can either be an X's and O's guy or you can be a motivator. And I think I know where Derek Lalonde is, because this team is not motivated to go out and play.
And I want to get back to something you said, because I think Yzerman's probably thinking it, and I know based on what I saw last night, the fan base is thinking it. Something needs to be done to save this season, because this roster with this coaching staff, as everything is being executed now, ain't it? However, this is when teams make their biggest mistakes. In situations like this, early in the season, panic moves. Listen, nobody is sitting here saying this team looks worse than me.
It took Edmonton to lose to San Jose last year before they finally made a change.
But that was even different, because they were expected to be good.
Yeah, if they could just loan us Connor McDavid when he's back from injury.
Okay, well, the Red Wings are expected to make the playoffs.
I don't know if expected. I think the most optimistic Wings fans going into this season were like, I'm not talking about the fans. But everybody, I think, would be like, I think we can lose in the first round this year. I think that is in the cards, and I think they should probably do that. That's the most optimistic Wings fans, or brass. The Oilers last year, the most optimistic, were saying this team can win the Stanley Cup. So they had the urgency. This team should not be out there giving up any premium assets for any short-term fixes. I'm not saying don't go trade for a, superstar if he comes available, if it's a long-term solution. Not saying that at all.
I don't know. San Jose won 2 games in a row, and then they were buying on players, so it might be the play.
Fair. If you're looking for a Liljegren would have been a good, cheap, not solution, but
upgrade.
Something like that, A-okay. You've got more than 1 year of team control. The cost was less than a second-round pick. A-okay with those moves. But panic move, we've seen time and time again, year after year, where teams that are in the exact position of the Detroit Red Wings right now overreact or do not understand where they are in the pecking order in the NHL, and they go and make big mistakes. And they start selling futures for short-term fixes where the best case scenario isn't even worth the short-term solution.
And this is why I think, again, there's more heat, even if some of it justified disproportionately on Derek Lalonde, because I think Steve Yzerman understands this is not a playoff roster. And so if you don't want to go out and make those moves, unfortunately, the only thing you have left to do is the stuff that doesn't count against the cap, which is your coach's salary. And I want to put this out there. Like, this has all been very like, hey, the heat is on Derek Lalonde, blah, 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 blah. I am a big believer of the fact that the coaching carousel in the NHL is too short. And there is, in certain cases, something to be said about giving a guy runway, especially when the roster isn't good. Because I think if you gave Derek Lalonde a better roster to work with, where his only option wasn't to just say, okay, we have terrible defense, everyone has to focus on defending, then maybe he can turn a different result with this. You look at Colorado and Jared Bednar, and they sucked with him to start, but that wasn't his fault, and they ended up winning a cup with him. That's an extreme example, I know, and I'm going to have tomatoes thrown at me by some people who are very hard against Derek Lalonde, and some people might agree, but I still think like you have to look at the nuance of this, whether or not it's the right move or whether or not it's the next move. I can't look at this roster and say, yeah, that is all Derek Lalonde's fault. Fully agree, and I raised it to start. Like, this team is not performing to standard, and some of that has to fall on the coaching staff. But how are you going to have a defense that is guaranteed to at least a couple shifts a game fail you and say, oh, yeah, the coach has to do better? Yeah, sure, the coach has to do better. The players have to do better. But by God, like, the pro scouting on this team is it's a massive problem. You can come in, you know, we're not going to start talking about names yet. It's still very early. And if November looks way different, then we're not having this conversation at Thanksgiving, for example. But you can bring in a different coach and you get that little new coach bump, and then you still have the same roster after. So I don't really see the long-term benefit. And again, going back to your point, Brad, you kind of don't want to make too big of a change unless it's something that's worthwhile, where you're bringing in a Kyle Connor or a Mikko Rantanen, or, you know, getting crazy. And again, tomatoes thrown at me, Mitch Marner or whoever. Unless you can add that talent and really shake things up in a few fell swoops, which hasn't really been Detroit's style, feels stuck.
I guess that's the other thing that really irks me is this is one of the oldest teams in the NHL, and they can't be bothered to show urgency, motivation for games. Those are the guys who should. You should be having to coach the young guys to get involved in hockey games, not a team of NHL veterans.
The optimistic view here is if they are patient and they realize they're not going to make the playoffs and they don't make a panic move, you could accidentally fall into the solution. I mean, I'm just saying, Hagens, Meiser, Porter Martoon do change the outlook of this team dramatically.
They do. They do. They genuinely do. And the unfortunate part is that's so far away. Like, if this starts to fall apart in February...
I cannot do this. I cannot do this.
And we joke, but that is legitimately the outlook. It's like the fan base can't... I don't know that they can do this a year of, like, terrible hockey to watch, a wasted year of Larkin's contract, you know... You're now on very expensive Seider and Raymond contracts. Like, they're also going to think, I can't do this. But if this was February or March where this collapse happened, for example, then they're thinking, okay, unfortunate, but hey, if we get a lottery luck here for the first time, then that is the free move.
Well, the Red Wings have Thursday, Friday, and they play the Sabres on Saturday night. So that's 2 full days of rest. I think we're going to know if they come out and lay another egg. I fear for the Sunday episode because I don't know how the temperature will continue to rise. But the November schedule looks, I mean, to an average fan, the schedule looks very decent. Like, they've got the Sabres, Blackhawks, the Leafs, who don't look great. They got the Rangers again, so that's not good. They've got Pittsburgh again.
Windwheel podcast, folks.
Yeah.
Windwheel podcast night.
If there's any game we can attempt to influence, it'll be that one. They've got the Penguins, who seem to have their number, but then they've got the Kings, Sharks, Islanders. The Bruins have been bad. The Islanders,
that's a West Coast road trip. Like,
oh, maybe they just need some West Coast living for a little bit.
Yeah, if I look at this team and how they're playing, I think they definitely need some more relaxation. That's the impression I get for sure.
Have you tried doing more of what you're doing? But what I'm trying to say is this isn't like October where it was wagon. There's teams they should beat and they do match up against. So if we are looking at the same team at the end of November, we're going to have there might be some nuclear temps in this room.
Basically, what's happening is all is right in the world as of December 1st, and we're having all the conversations we expected to have this year, or we're starting the prospect profiles December 1st.
If we start these prospect profiles in the calendar year of our Lord, 2024, out that window. We'll do it. We'll do it, but I am first jumping out the window, and that's that. And Evan, you said one thing. If this team is still looking like this at the end of November, there might be some nuclear attempts. I don't think it gets to the end of November. At the very least, that is about where I think, because I don't know that another month of this is sustainable.
Saturday for me is really, are we sitting down at the table to have some crazy conversations? If they come out and are as bad as they have looked through 9 of 10 games, 8.5 of 10 games, that's when I'm going to start joining you guys on some of the crazy stuff.
I hate that you guys keep saying 8.5 out of 10 games, and I go, wow, that is an optimistic take.
I think we're just doing it to piss you. Next episode, we're going to say 7.75.
No.
Due to inflation.
Yeah, that's right.
No. My point is the 8.5 is very justifiable, which is the problem.
All right, folks, we are going to hear a quick word from the sponsors of the Winged Wheel podcast. And after that, we're going to be joined by Craig Custance, author of The Franchise, for a great conversation on what it takes to build a winning roster in the NHL and tales from behind the management and coaching space in the NHL. Really, really great, insightful conversation. We'll be back with you after this. This episode of the Winged Wheel podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown. So next time you're watching hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for Detroit, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer, and it's great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode or the one you see on your screen to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. Here with us today on the Winged Wheel podcast is none other than Craig Custance, head of creative development at The Athletic, author of the new book, The Franchise, The Business of Building Winning Teams, and host of the most exclusive poker table in Michigan, I believe. Still waiting to get in there. Craig, welcome back to the show. It's been some time.
Oh, thanks for having me back, Ryan. It has been a minute, and you're always welcome. Well, it depends on how good you are at the poker table.
Not very. Not
Great.
very.
Totally welcome.
So a little backstory, and Craig, I didn't even tell you I was going to say this. I just thought of this right now.
Yeah.
Craig has a lot to do with this podcast's growth. Obviously, Craig, heading up The Athletic Detroit when The Athletic first launched, and we used to basically incessantly try to have him on the show. And he came on a couple times, I believe. And then one day, I'm sure he had a million other things on his table, and he just emailed and said, "Hey, we have a new guy in The Athletic. He's the beat writer for the Red Wings. His name's Max. Please go talk to him." And you were very kind to not say, "Leave me the hell alone." But,
that's
I was
how
like,
you
okay.
interpreted that? I was just trying to give Max some love. I was not pawning him off.
No, but you know what? We're all the better for it, because Max is obviously an incredible sports writer, and I think one of the best in the business. But so, Craig, not just for your work, but for also connecting us with Max, we owe you quite a bit here.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. Max is the best. I think back to when we launched that group, and it's Max and Katie Strang and Brendan Quinn and Cody and Chris Burke, and just these incredible. It was so much fun, and to be Colton Pouncey. I mean, it was. These are not only was it fun to launch in Detroit, these were just incredible people to build something with, and Max is at the top. I love Max, just full stop.
As we all do. And now that Max's allotted time that he paid for to say nice things about him has run out, we can now get to the meat and potatoes of this interview. Craig, you just recently published a book called The Franchise, The Business of Building Winning Teams. not just because of being familiar with your work was I excited to read this, but because in the modern NHL, there's a game behind the game, which is the salary cap, GMs, coaches, scouting. Some of it has defined rules like the CBA, and some of it seems really nebulous. Like, how do you develop a goalie? What does a goalie coach or your prospect development system, how does that feed into it? And I think this book is a really, really great entry into that. So talk to us a little bit about, what inspired you to write this and some of the things that you learned through the process.
Yeah. I would say it was part selfish. Like, I was transitioning into management full-time at the Athletic and still wanted to, talk to these people that know what they're doing, that have built great things in the NHL. So, there was a lot for me to learn, and it was just an area that I'm really interested in. Even when I was writing full time, I loved roster construction. I think back to when we were launching the Athletic Detroit, we started doing things like projecting lineups 3 years out, and there was a lot of like nuts and bolts roster stuff, and so I just loved that, and I loved even in Detroit talking about rebuild and how do you do a proper rebuild, and all of these topics have always fascinated me. And so, here was this opportunity. I was getting into management, trying to learn about leadership, trying to learn about how to build a culture, and use this book as an avenue to go behind the scenes and sit down with people like, Julien Brisebois and George McPhee, who, built an incredible franchise in Vegas, and Kyle Dubas, and just a number of just high achiever, Lou Lamoriello, and also wanted to work in kind of up and comers like Megan Duggan, who I think is going to be a GM. I'm just completely convinced of it. She is a superstar in kind of the executive space. And then on the ownership side, a guy like Tom Dundon, who does things completely different. Like, I can't imagine, I think of the ownership in Detroit versus Tom Dundon, like couldn't run teams on polar opposite sides of the equation. And I think in terms of learning, these are so many different kinds of personalities and styles. I think there's a couple of takeaways. One, you can build that you can do things completely differently and still have success. The way that Julien Brisebois thinks is much different than a guy like Jim Rutherford, who, won 3 Stanley Cups and has done a really good job in Vancouver. So, that was probably the primary thing is there are a lot of common threads with some of these leaders in hockey, but I think there's a lot of different paths to success.
Were there any kind of preconceived notions that you had coming into this about what went into roster construction or how teams operated that you threw out the window as you went through this process, or you learned was way different than even what your kind of journalistic approach to things wouldn't have revealed earlier?
Yeah. I think one of them, I'm a process guy, so I'm fascinated by process. So I was really interested in learning about how when you're going to blow up a roster, all these things that we talk about on the outside. Oh, let's blow up the core, or let's tear it down and rebuild. And we kind of say it flippantly. I just wanted to really get an understanding of the thought process that goes into that. Like, what are you doing as a manager or a team president or whatever it is, or as an owner, to decide when and when not to do that, and how do you execute? And so, for this book, a good example, one story would kind of lead to the next. And so, I spent some time with Kyle Dubas. We were actually in Traverse City. There's a little bookstore in downtown Traverse City called Horizons. And, we were walking around and we sat down and talked for a while. And he was coming off, he was running the Toronto Maple Leafs at the time, coming off disappointing playoff loss, kind of they were in the middle of that for a couple of years in a row, and really wrestling with what to do with the core of the team. And, that was to me probably in terms of team building, and you kind of make some assumptions, there's so much wrestling and thought went into how he operated the exit interviews and talking to players. Then how did he take their input and apply it to his decision making? Who in the league does he talk to get advice? And so in this case, he reached out to Brian McClellan, who was running the Washington Capitals. Obviously, he won a Stanley Cup with Alex Ovechkin, but I was covering the league at ESPN at the time, and before the Capitals won the Cup, they were getting the same exact criticism as the Toronto Maple Leafs. And so just to hear what Brian McClellan says to Kyle Dubas. And then the fun thing about doing a book is then you just, I flew to Washington, D.C. to go find that story out and sit down with the ownership there and Ted Leonsis and really, how did they get through those challenges and what was their process? And so that was a fun thing. I like to learn about the kind of the decisions behind the decisions, if that makes sense, or the process, I think, more than anything.
Well, you opened up Traverse City, so I have to, you said not for a lack of trying, but Steve Yzerman does not feature prominently in this book with a direct interview, because Steve Yzerman is Fort Knox as far as GMs go.
I spent time with Julien Brisebois, who was AGM under Steve. Got into, there's a good story that Julien tells that actually involves Ryan Martin when there was an AGM opening in Tampa and Steve was talking to Julien, and actually Ryan Martin accepted that job. I mean, Red Wings fans probably remember that, and I think other people have forgotten. Like, he would have been Julien Brisebois, ultimately just changes his mind and calls Julien and says, "Hey, I think you'd be great with Steve. I think, you would be the person that should do this job." And then Julien and Steve connected, and there's some really good insight from Julien about what those conversations with Steve Yzerman were like, and kind of what the recruitment process was. And they talked on the phone almost every night for a period of time, and eventually we should probably meet when they hadn't. And I think it gave you a glimpse into how Steve operates, how Julien operates.
And I think it is really interesting, though, to see not just, how people talk about Steve around the league, but also, talking to Ryan Martin, understanding how Brisebois came to be and working so closely with him and his success after Steve Yzerman left. And as I understand it, you also talked to Jim Nill, who has a massive mark on the Red Wings, and to this day also someone who has massive success outside of Detroit after he left.
Yeah, I mean, Jim Nill is obviously, was formed in that Red Wings front office. And the interesting thing about Jim, we sat down and watched prospects play together, and just, he's known for his scouting, he's known for his development, and was really just trying to watch a game through his eyes more than anything. And, I think I went into that chapter with one thing in mind. I'm like, this is going to, be a theme around scouting. Like, that's, I was in my head thinking as a writer, let's have some themes to each of these chapters. Let's touch on different parts of the game. And Jim Nill's the perfect one. He's, if you going back to Ottawa, he's part of the Alfredson draft. Then you get to Detroit, and it's Zetterberg, Datsuk, Kronwall. These are all drafts he's running. Gets to Dallas and has the, ridiculous draft with Heiskanen and Ottinger, and three great players in one draft. Jim, and I don't know if you've talked to him, but you're not going to get, the whole time he's crediting everybody else. He's like, oh, in Ottawa, that was actually this person. And in Detroit, that's all, Håkan Andersson, and it's Joe Mack in Dallas. And so it ended up having a completely different flavor, where a lot of the Jim Nill chapter is focused on the people around him and the kind of boss he is. And they ended up sharing stories about how he ends up, he leads through serving, which is a different style than I think some other, it goes back to, there's a lot of different ways to win. And I think that ended up being a unique chapter, not in the way I intended it, but just in his style that's so different than everybody else.
On that note, are there any kind of hockey personalities that people would have assumed are, one way or very stoic or not much to them, that are much different once you talk to them behind the scenes and away from the cameras?
Yeah. I think Lou Lamoriello was the one that I went in with one image in my head of how he was. And, I wrote this, I went in thinking that he's somebody who I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the rules and the shaving and the haircuts and all the stuff that seems a bit outdated. And, you have somebody that's been doing it that long and has kind of, I guess, archaic rules. And you wonder, does that make sense in a modern game? And by the end of it, and talking to him, and as he explained the why behind everything, and as you talk to people that are loyal to him, including people he's fired and, traded and had huge arguments and contract disputes with, and they end up being extremely loyal to him. And you find out as a leader how he operates behind the scenes. He was somebody that, honestly, there's a couple chapters where I'm like, this could have been an entire book. Lou Lamoriello, honestly, could have been an entire book as a case study in how to run an organization. Even going back, I got a little bit into it in his days running the athletic department at Providence, and how he turned out multiple great coaches out of that program. a player in Billy Donovan who went on to be, win national championships. Billy was unbelievable talking about Lou and basically the kind of work ethic he demanded out of players and other coaches. But Lou was great about what he learned by surrounding himself with those great coaches. And so, that he was the one where I kind of had in my head, I'm like, oh, this is kind of how this guy is. And by the end of it was thinking differently.
You said there's not one single way to win. And I believe that, but through this kind of research and writing process, no,
I believe that.
Maybe I might believe that a little bit. Through this process, do you think that you have a better idea of maybe a couple different ways where you can win in the NHL, where some teams are down those lanes and some aren't?
Yeah, I think it's more general than that. Like I think there's certainly common themes. One thing that came up over and over again was the people that have the most success are the ones that are willing to make really hard decisions and probably quickly, like, hire slow, fire fast kind of mentality. And, George McPhee was really good on that because he was able to take lessons of how long he was in Washington, 17 years or whatever that number was, and start fresh and really apply them and say, okay, I learned my lesson with coaches in Washington. We're not going to mess around with coaches anymore. If there's a better coach available, we're going to go get them. And you look at what he did in Vegas, going from Gerard Gallant, to Pete DeBoer and to Bruce. Like, this is somebody that was up in his mind upgrading. I mean, we can argue whether or not he was, but like really you could see it was a different tack than how he operated in Washington. Julien Brisebois, I caught him in a moment in time where he was really wrestling with a decision around Ryan McDonough and, had to end up trading a guy that had helped them win a Stanley Cup. And that's a really hard thing to do. Unpopular. I'm sure the coaches weren't thrilled with him. You're trading the heart and soul of your defense. And this is somebody that's saying, I have to like kind of go out on an island and make this decision because I'm managing 10 other things that go into this decision. And so I think the constant, thread of success was people that were willing to make really hard decisions that might make them look unpopular. And there's so much scrutiny as a manager from fans, from whatever. You just have to do it, and whether or not you think it's going to be, applauded by the fan base or not.
Is there an aspect to the behind the scenes? Not necessarily, making big trades or hiring and firing coaches, but more of the player development or the maybe data and analytics department or things like that you think are consistent across successful organizations that maybe isn't like a universally applied methodology, for example?
It's hard to say. Like, I mean, I think if you look at how teams are built, some have massive front offices, some are run really thin. Like, I think Carolina does things so much different than everybody else. But if you would talk to other teams or other people running teams, it's poor Don Waddell, when he was there, not only was he the general manager, but he was putting on concerts and stuff like that. You were asking a lot out of your employees. So like, to say this is one thing that you have to have across the board, I don't know. Like, I feel like, if it was that easy, I guess you would just copycat, right? And so I think to me, the harder thing, Ryan, was hockey is so fluky and so full of luck that when you're trying to study championship teams or successful teams, like, what do you really pull from it to apply to your team versus what do you just say, hey, they hit that player number one overall. Like, anybody could have won with that team. You know what I mean? Like, there's even like the Capitals, and studying them, they win a Stanley Cup, but they go into Columbus down after dropping 2 games at home and should have lost game 3 to the Columbus Blue Jackets. And I was sent to that game to write about Barry Trotz being fired because he was going to be. Like, that was, and instead they go into overtime. Panarin hits a post, and then they get lucky. There's a bounce. They win the game, and they go on to win a Stanley Cup. So does that, all of a sudden now we're studying the Capitals, which is, we should. Like, they won a Stanley Cup, and there's a lot to learn from the process and how they got there. But at the same time, they could have lost that game. Barry Trotz could have gotten fired. His career looks differently. We're probably, maybe Ovechkin never wins a cup. We're talking about him differently. I think that's the biggest thing about hockey, where you how do you evaluate the successful teams? Not, and I can tell you, like a guy like Tom Dundon, who's so data driven, would, he said it in this book. He's like, I don't think Stanley Cup should be the sole evaluation model. He's like, I think, you need a larger sample size. You need to look at winning percentage over time. That's how you measure success. But he's like, I also realize that's not how it goes. Like, it's about winning Stanley Cups.
When we talk about teams, in their competitive window and stuff, we get really buried in their roster on paper. But something that we've come to appreciate, especially over years of doing, preseason predictions on the show, and I've bet on the Bruins to fall too many times. I'm not stupid enough to do it anymore. How much tangible kind of evidence did you see of winning culture in the locker room, and how much that actually affects and stops teams from falling off?
I mean, I believe there's culture. So I think Vegas is a really good case study on this one, because they've built a culture of high expectations and of like greatness from everybody in the organization. And they talk about, if the PR person to the person in media to whatever, like they want to get the best possible person for that job. They've just said, we are going to be great at everything. Like, that is our expectation here. That's a culture that you're building. That's different when you say, oh, this guy's great in the room, or we need these type of players, because they actually did the opposite. If you remember, they hit the expansion draft, then they go to the cup final with the Misfits, and everybody's talking about how special those guys were, and they caught lightning in a bottle, and that's a great room. And then they dismantled that team. Like, they completely dismantled that team, and just got ripped for it. And because people were like, oh, they had something special, and now they're going after Jack Eichel and Pietrangelo, and they fired the coach. And what their guiding light was, we're just trying to upgrade constantly, and we're trying to get the best. And we believe these are the ingredients you need to win. We believe you have to have a number one center. We believe you have to have a number one defenseman that plays a certain way. And until we have that, we're going to constantly upgrade. Now, does that, in theory, hurt your player culture? I guess. But I've also talked to players that say those are the teams I want to be a part of, that have kind of this relentless drive to win. And I think it's just a different kind of culture.
Okay, so we don't spoil any kind of potential sales here. I don't want you to give me your best story from the book, and I don't even want you to give me the second best story from your book, but can you give us one kind of quick story to hook people in so that they can check out the franchise once they're done listening to this interview?
Oh, yeah, like I love like the exit interview stuff. And so there were some great stories about, what after the Maple Leafs loss, what Austin Matthews said, what Joe Thornton said, and what kind of big players in the Maple Leafs said as in terms. And then what I thought was more interesting was talking to the people with the Capitals, and we were talking about how much do you weigh that input. And I was told that the players, after they lost to the Penguins in the most heart-wrenching playoff series I've ever covered in my entire life, this is, I think, the year before they won the Stanley Cup, they were just crushed. They finally thought they had the right team, right culture, were playing the right way, the right coach. The Penguins beat them again. I walk into that dressing room. I still can picture TJ Oshie, like just drenched in sweat, saying like, how much do we have to go through before we win? And just devastated. And Brian McClellan told a story, like they did exit interviews, and the players were brutally honest and said, and he's like, they came out with two clear recommendations, just like clear, like to a player. And he said, we didn't do either of them. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like, why even, so, and he's like, it could have been a disaster the next year. They end up winning a Stanley Cup, and it's great. And then there's actually a moment in time where they're celebrating a Stanley Cup, and Nick Backstrom goes to Ted Leonsis, says he's in tears, and he says, thank you for not trading me, because there was a point where Nick Backstrom had gone to ownership and said, like, this is not working. I want out, essentially. So like, these are the kinds of stories that are in, like, I just find that all fascinating. That, all these things happen. And what Dick Patrick, who's been with the Capitals a long time, said, and, his family goes back generations in hockey. And he's like, look, when you're getting input, in the most emotional time from players, it's not always like done with clarity. Like they just gave it their all and lost. So of course they're going to be like, we needed to make all these massive changes. They're upset and they're emotional. And like that to me, when you talk about team building, you talk about leadership, you talk about getting a lot of different inputs before you make a decision, then it's like, then you do nothing. I think that's fascinating.
Well, I'm excited to dive more into this book, folks. The Franchise, The Business of Building Winning Teams. There's going to be a link in the description on how to get yours today. We are also going to give away 2 copies, one directly to our Patreon supporters and one broad one on a Twitter giveaway. In the meantime, while you're on Twitter, follow Craig Custance at Craig Custance. And Craig, congratulations. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No, my pleasure. Good seeing you, Ryan.
Welcome back. Thank you so much to Craig Custance for joining the show and for giving us something positive to talk about this episode. Nice little switch of the tone for us. Very quickly, let's jump into some NHL news. Brad, you mentioned earlier in the episode about Timothy Liljegren being traded from Toronto right shot D to the San Jose Sharks in exchange for Matt Benning, a 2025 third, and San Jose's 2026 6th-round pick. So in the end, Liljegren, he had some contract to him, so it wasn't he didn't have the most value for Toronto, but still a pretty cheap return for Liljegren. And San Jose continues to kind of stack up some talent of varying, like none of these guys are superstars, but they're loading it up over there. I've given Greer some crap in the past, but I've liked a lot of the moves he's made.
They're in the position where you take swings. And if it can be a cheap swing, all the better. Liljegren's underlyings have been cause for optimism. He hasn't played a big role in Toronto, so obviously he's going to get a bigger role in San Jose, and it may go poorly for him. But if it doesn't, man, a third and a sixth and a depth defenseman is a hell of a easy price to pay for a guy who can maybe give you some solutions on the blue line for the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years.
Liljegren moves the puck really well and has had flashes of offensive brilliance. He's just been really hampered by injuries, and he's stuck behind a Toronto lineup that, refused to play Rasmus Sandin in a bigger role and Timothy Liljegren. So I really like this move. I think there's definitely more to Liljegren's game that San Jose can unlock.
Elsewhere in the NHL, news has come out about the new NHL franchise valuations, which won't matter to a lot of fans, but it also does matter because I think this informs on what they're going to charge for future expansion franchises. And these numbers are going to tell you why the NHL is going to expand again, because this much money you are not going to pass up for free. So the average NHL franchise from the Sportico article is now valued at a $1.79 billion valuation. That's up 37% in the past year alone.
Insane.
At the top, the Leafs at $3.66 billion, the Rangers next with $3.25, the Habs $2.93, and Detroit, despite sucking for the past 10 years or whatever, they're still top 10 at $1.85 billion. So safe to say once Detroit is actually winning again, that they're going to be higher up that list as a major hockey market, an original 6 team, etc. But those numbers, like this is why I think the NHL is going to charge $2 billion or somewhere in that ballpark for their next franchises. And that's why I still believe they're going to make plans for 36
You think they're going to charge $2 billion?
Yes.
The concessions those owners are going to want in terms of a playoff ready team,
no. Dude, it's already set up for them. They can point to Vegas and Seattle, who is still Seattle. Well, Seattle's not garbage, and Vegas won a cup, and they were competitive right away.
I guess Utah's not an expansion team, but yeah, no. They don't fit in this mold.
And pro sports franchises are money printers. They're money printers. 37% for the NHL, which doesn't know how to grow. That's insane.
It's idiot proof.
It genuinely is idiot proof, and for billionaires and billionaire conglomerates who have too much money to play with.
It's not, we're seeing the days of individual ownership is long gone unless you invented Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's conglomerates, it's massive groups now. That's why these valuations, I think, have gone up significantly.
By the way, you're the one who owns that massive Bitcoin wallet that's basically propping up the price of all of it, right?
I'll neither confirm nor deny.
Okay, and then final little bit here this is from Let's Go Red Wings prospects on Twitter, but we talked about Axel Sandin Pellikka and how well he's doing. Right now, he is currently, or as of the 30th, he was 7th in SHL points, 5 goals, 8 assists, and he is 1st in SHL points for defensemen and first for any junior player. So for those looking for hope on the horizon, Axel Sandin Pellikka, please help.
You're our only hope.
What way does he shoot?
Right.
Yeah, that's the good stuff.
Yeah. Okay. It is time to jump into overtime.
We're going to overtime.
Overtime is brought to us by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to support the show, you get access to some really great benefits. For example, you're automatically entered into all of our giveaways. We're giving away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game. We're sorry. The vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. You also get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord. Additionally, you get access to all of our bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones, and any other additional bonus content we make. We just revamped all of our Patreon tiers and just sent out a bunch of cool Patreon merch to certain tiers. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. Some questions from our patrons, and there's a theme in this one. Best James Bond says, panic is ramping. I figured regression was possible and frankly speaking likely. Seeing it in action, though, is horrifying. Is it the flu or did this team forget their system completely over the summer? Whether the flu caused a slow start, because, Tarasenko was out that game, and you switch the roster around even a little bit, the system's going to feel different. Was the system sustainable? There's a lot of different questions that way. I just think things don't hold the way season over season, especially when you tinker with the roster and it doesn't get better, right?
I think people underestimate how much losing Walman, Gostisbehere, and Perron hurt.
Yeah, 100%. Hockeytown Racing Academy says, well, first one says, are we starting to enter Derek Lalonde hot seat territory? And the second question is it early to ask why Michael Misa's draft stock has fallen after being considered the number 1 2025 draft prospect a couple of years ago? So Misa was considered almost in the same vein as Bedard for a while.
Don't get it mistaken. He's going to be challenging Higgins. He's ripping apart the OHL right now. He's pretty sure, at least as of when I last checked, which would have been a few days ago, probably on the weekend, he was leading the OHL in scoring. And again, yeah, it's his third year in the league, but he's still 17 years old. 17-year-olds do not lead the OHL in scoring. He's still a tippy top prospect. And also, it's worth noting, Porter Martone's right there with him.
Yeah. His game looks real. Watching him skate the way he glides, you're like, wow, this game has gotten so much better than when we were younger, right? How much has Cale Makar influenced, and I don't mean just for defensemen, how much has Cale Makar influenced the importance and how much kids focus on skating and moving and pivoting your hips so effortlessly?
I can tell you this, watching all of Mika and Hank's practices and skill work, a lot.
Yeah.
They're doing it at that age.
Miss Days says, is American Thanksgiving too early to pull the chute? This team has shown nothing in the process in 10 games to even suggest they hit 500. As we talked about, I think Thanksgiving would be generous even if it continues this way.
It's probably worth asking the question, what does pulling the chute even look like for this team? They have no prospects they can call up, and they have nobody on the roster outside of maybe one guy with any value for the trade deadline this year.
And that was the next question, because it was, maybe Maatta can be the first of many. Well, you're kind of locked in, right?
Kane. That's about it.
That
if you're looking for the trade deadline, you might actually get a return and it would benefit the future and teams will be interested. It's Kane. Everybody else on a 1-year deal on this team isn't good. And everybody else you either don't want to get rid of or their contract's too long.
The next question here from Avery's Sloppy Seconds says, the impact of Yzerman's need to fit his UFA additions around the Seider and Raymond contracts has been huge. The replacements for Perron and Ghost have been abysmal. And the only reason I bring that one up is because I want to expand on it. It's not that Raymond and Seider's contracts are the reason this team are bad. It's about why things were tight around them that I think is notable here, because I don't know that you can say they could have gone out and bought this guy or kept this guy and this team would have been a lot better. The free agent market isn't what you think it is. But at the same time, okay, if Perron was so important, if Gostisbehere was so important, if X player is so important, or there's various free agents who I think they were in on, like the Carrier types, whatever, then yeah, saving more money elsewhere on the other big contracts that they handed out even not big ones, even the small ones. Hall, the Petry contract, part of it that they acquired, Gustafsson, like that all adds up.
The pro scouting department is a disaster right now, is probably the most polite way I can put it.
Michael DeAngelis says, hey guys, recent subscriber. Help. Jeremy Dahl says, question, how much difference would a coaching change make? Like, what has more effect on the game? If you take a terrible team and give them the best coach, would they beat the best team with the terrible coach? It's not like the NFL is big on coaching, game in and game out. I think coaching can have a big influence in the NHL. I think roster is bigger, but at the extremes, you'll see the difference.
I remember hearing the phrase, a great coach will make a good team great, and a good coach will make a great team good. So do with that information what you will.
Last one here. Give Walman the Heart says, who does Lucas Raymond need to fight at practice this week? Him and the team did look different after him and Chiarot got into it. I don't know. Everyone?
So
save us, Lucas.
We've all seen the Battle of the Bastards, right?
Oh, yeah. That's when I had hope for that show still.
Yeah. So the scene with Jon Snow standing there by himself with everyone coming at him.
Maybe Evan. So in case you didn't notice, Evan wasn't here for overtime. It's because we actually sent him to Detroit to get his ass kicked by Mo and Lucas in practice. Okay. We're going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. For better or for worse, we're going to be back with you on Sunday after the Buffalo episode. Thank you to Craig Custance for making this episode somewhat positive, and thank you all for tuning in. To all of our Patreon supporters, we could not do this without you. Happy Halloween, folks. Hope if you're out there with kids or yourselves trick-or-treating, have fun. If you're handing out full-size candy bars, you're a good person. To all of the sponsors of the Winged Wheel Podcast, thank you so much. And to our patrons again, we could not do this show without you guys. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to support the show. And if you want to support the show, but Patreon's not for you, leave a rating and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Leave that rating, hit the subscribe button, tell a friend. All those are ways that you can really help the show out. Our name level supporters on Patreon, you're the heart and soul of this. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Victor Zetterberg, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Whitehead, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Adam Rose, Adam Zuiza, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Asher Killian, Banana Terracotta Pie, Best James Bond, Carl, Brutina Nanaluski, Carl Provi, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Cider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, God Creatives, Give Blood, Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hussam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, John Engels, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, Mr. Kuzi, R.A., Riley Enright, Ryan Britt, Scott Martin, Skeletor, Stephen Ordeleb, brand new name level supporter. That's what I appreciate about you. The new Jackson 5 Holes, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Winged Boogie, Iserplan Stan, General Andy Bohannon of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, AA Ron, AB, All Motor No Hands, Ann Stanislavski, Axel Sandy Pelika, Bellingham Acid Balls, Bex, Chimkim Nutgits, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Layton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsukes Dangleberries, Dylan Larkin, Trade Sacrifice, Eric Nance, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Golf Sucks, Grepsky, Griffey Boy, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, Jim, JM Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, Josh Yelton, Keenan O'Donohue, Kasper the Unfriendly Ghost, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Larkin's Loyal Lemming, brand new name level supporter, welcome to the Dub Dub Club, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hall, Lucas Raitmond, Ophelia, As Good As It Gets, Proud of You Winged Wheel Podcast Boys, Ryan M, Shawnee Pat in the Hat, brand new name level supporter, welcome Shawnee, Steven, that other guy, the Hodag, the One-Handed Wonder, brand new name level supporter, welcome to the Dub Dub Club, the Hat 123, Trent Thorough, Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. Till Sunday.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to visit wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you'll find links to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find ways to support the show, like Patreon, official podcast merchandise, and more. And don't forget to follow us on X at Winged Wheel Pod, at Ryan Hanna, WWP, at Brad Crisco, and at Hockeytown Evan, as well as Winged Wheel Podcast on Instagram.